All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 14
Stacking them.
of Coach's Corner with Justin and Ethan. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Justin.
No, I'm Justin.
He's Ethan.
And you're Ethan.
That is true.
And we are Coach's Corner. Now, I'm Coach Justin.
And I am Coach Ethan.
And today, we're going to be talking about, does protein make you, is protein unhealthy? Can protein give you cancer?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I don't know. I feel like we haven't really talked about protein much. So
I've just been, this whole time I thought that protein was supposed to be good for us. And now there's this Vox article that's saying protein's going to give me cancer. And it just leaves me wondering, like, if protein gives me cancer and carbohydrates give me diabetes and fat's going to give me a heart attack, what do we do?
You can eat lettuce. It's basically just solid water.
I guess I'm just going to get some iceberg lettuce and eat that.
That's the most devoid of anything but
Right.
water and small amount of fiber.
So we'll just be breaking down this Vox article, but I think really it's more of a bigger topic. The Vox article we're referring to is, I think it was literally called, Will Protein Give You Cancer? Can protein be unhealthy?
You're probably eating way too much protein.
You're probably eating way too much protein. So they have their thing. And
the title. And
so, we're going to dig into where these numbers even came from, why we should be consuming certain amounts of protein, like how do we even come to this conclusion, how fair or unfair this Vox article was, maybe what the nuance is on what we should be doing and what this article I feel like left out.
What's the takeaway too? Like
the takeaway.
Is there something of benefit they're trying to get across?
Right. So without further ado,
complete nonsense. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, but
it's not complete nonsense. It's just missing the forest through the trees.
Like usual.
Tunnel
vision.
Yeah, it's framing a slice of truth to fit an agenda that they want to perpetuate. And when you look at, so just a little backstory, like Vox it's a left-leaning news article, right, or a left-leaning news publication. So that would imply probably more, environmental, more vegan-based agenda, which, by the way, we're not here to say that that's wrong at all.
No.
But I think where it kind of gets murky is we're taking certain aspects of the truth and we're trying to frame it in a way to promote an agenda, but it's really misinformation. And it's not just Vox. I mean, both sides of the spectrum do this. If you go read like carnivore, paleo, keto blogs, they're also demonizing vegans as like soy boys are going to grow boobs if you eat soy protein and all this bullshit. That's not true.
Right. It's not as bioavailable, those kind of ideas.
Yeah. So I think like with anything in life, the answer's in the middle somewhere. And, unfortunately, we're not the place to go to if you want clickbaity sort of like fear-mongering type of stuff. But if you want like the straight answers, I hope that we can help break that down and distill it down for y'all. So I thought it'd be fun to just talk a little bit about what the backstory on protein is, where we came to this number that is floated out there of how much we should be consuming on a daily basis.
Right.
That might help set the stage a little bit on why we should even be eating the amounts that we should be eating and where that initial notion came from.
And for some backstory, the Vox article is basically saying that most Americans eat twice the daily amount recommended by the federal dietary guidelines. So their big thing is like, everybody's just eating way too much protein. You don't need to. Then there's some scare-tastic stipulations about eating more protein and how it has negative effects on your health with cancer and heart disease and that kind of a thing. So there's the backstory of what Vox is saying. So, they're talking about eating less than about maybe 70 grams a day.
Vox is saying that the standard recommended dosage is like, 60 grams a day or something?
Yep. It's about 60 grams on average, give or take. So that's like for a 200-pound man, might be around 70. That's a larger individual. Most people aren't 200 pounds.
Right.
So,
but what they're saying is that as a country, we're eating twice that. So 100,
so on average,
120.
150, 120, 150, 170.
Which is pretty much what we recommend to our clients all the time.
That's what I would say to a 200-pound man would be like to try to get at least 150 grams of protein.
If you're a woman, I would say 100 to 120. Men, 150 would be great.
Give or take,
Give or take,
a
right?
little more, a little less, but...
And I've only had very, very positive results from those kind of recommendations. I've yet to have a client get cancer and die on me from protein. So yeah, and again, I think it's important to understand like that recommendation is like kind of a minimum threshold, not like a maximum potential for your human body, but like a minimum threshold that needs to be met.
It's a minimum threshold for sure. I mean, I think that like what they say is that's like for prolonged exposure, like 40 grams for an average man is like the absolute, so you don't die. Like you are like on the verge. You are just teetering by. So if you're talking about 60 grams a day, you're not really talking about a thriving amount of protein here. We're talking about a survival amount.
If you're a 90-pound person, maybe 50 grams a day would be okay.
Yeah,
like that would be fine.
Yeah, I think you could get away with it for sure. And
but if you're like, and this is where we have to talk about: are we surviving or are we thriving?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Call me crazy. Most people don't listen to podcasts on fitness and health and go to the gym and train and are genuinely concerned about grams of protein if they're just trying to survive.
just so I literally don't wither away. So I maintain cellular function.
Right. Like that's probably not the, and so it's like I have yet to meet somebody who's just like, I'm just trying to survive, man. It's like we live in a place where we don't have to make that survival-based decision. We can kind of elevate the hierarchy of needs just a tad.
Well, so as I say, minimum wage is supposed to be a survivable amount of money, but I feel like most people take efforts to make more than minimum wage.
Like the poverty line is 15 grand a year. Yes. Like we don't want to be there.
Yeah.
But like if we can at least be above that or at that, we can probably at least survive as a person, but we would try to be better.
Yes.
But so that's, right there, right off the bat, it's like, who are we trying to address here with that kind of statement? It's like, I think most people would love to see better results than just baseline survival.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that sets the stage on what the sort of like minimum threshold recommended amount that we should all be consuming at least. I think the preface would be like at least 60 grams or 50 grams or whatever it is.
Yep.
But now we also know, like in the fitness world and in exercise science, we know that when we observe people and we put them under, a good nutrition protocol and exercise, that we need to see at least 0.5 grams per pound of body weight.
Minimum.
Least, at least. So if you're a 150-pound person, that would be like a minimum of 75 grams. If you're a 200-pound person, a minimum of 100 grams. Just in order to give your body what it needs to repair from your workouts. But really, we don't start seeing the positive effects of higher protein, meaning better muscle retention, more lean mass, bone density, recovery, until you get about the 0.7 grams per pound of body weight to 1 gram per pound of body weight.
I think every fitness professional that just keeps it by the book of what's known to be true starts at 0.7 per pound. That's like kind of like, not that you couldn't do 0.5, but that 0.7 is like lower end. You don't have to go all the way up to the 1 gram per pound. It's an easy number to shoot from the hip, 200 pounds, 200 grams of protein, but that's on the higher end. But I think everybody would agree that for any type of composition goals or athletic goals, that 0.7 is kind of the go-to starting point.
I follow a lot of fitness pros, man. I watch a lot of YouTube. And I post a lot of stuff and I watch a lot of stuff. And anyone I respect, PhD level, sports scientists, it's like
it's just right there.
1 gram.
It's just right there.
You don't need more than that. Anything more than that's diminishing returns. It would be hard to make the argument for more, but anything less, 0.7 to 1 gram is where you want to land. So where do we come up with this number? Why is that a thing? Where did this come from? Quick little backstory on protein. Basically, this all like agriculture were meaning like livestock, pigs, cows. They're the ones that kind of found this, threshold of how much protein an animal should be consuming, because we got to understand, like, protein is essentially the only macronutrient that contains nitrogen.
Yep.
Your body has to maintain a nitrogen balance in order to keep all these things functioning, muscle mass and bone density and all these things.
Nerves, right? All
So we consume food. All food kind of has a little bit of everything in it, but there's certain foods that have higher proteins and carbs and fats. Proteins are the most expensive macronutrients. So if you think about agriculture as a business,
which it is,
and it is, right? And they're trying to, maximize their profits, and so they don't want to overfeed their livestock with too much protein because it is the most expensive.
Yeah.
And so they're the ones that kind of did the research on what this nitrogen balance is, which is essentially a proxy for protein. So how do we find the sweet spot where we can give these animals just enough to maximize the yield on the livestock without overdoing it? And what's that perfect nitrogen balance? And so they would feed them protein, they would measure how much protein they were giving these animals, and they would test their urine and stool to see how much nitrogen they were expelling. And long story short, they kind of found that the 0.5 grams of protein per pound was the sweet spot for nitrogen balance. And so that's why, like, we would say a minimum of protein per day would be that 0.5 grams per pound.
That'd be
of body
a
weight.
minimum. Whereas the article's citing 0.36 grams.
Yeah.
Which is,
which is survival.
Again, goes back to the fact that, so, they're using this information that portrays these numbers like, oh, the National Academics of Science recommended 0.36 grams per pound. Well, that sounds legit. That maybe I don't need to eat a gram per pound every day. That's 3 times as much. That seems wild. So I think it's with like those kind of contrasts where it's like, okay, they're throwing out numbers below what's needed to just for industry standard profits, which I understand this whole conversation, but they're obviously going to do the minimum effective dose to make sure that livestock are plump and healthy without having to spend more money, which comes to 0.5.
Like, there's some objective truth to that. Just like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Farmers aren't going to they want to figure out what that sweet spot is for their animals to have that nitrogen balance. They're not just, in a state of atrophy. So
Plop it over to humans, basically.
Yeah, and so we can translate that to us, right? But one of the points in the article was that the overall amount of protein consumption in America has gone up, like, significantly.
Which I would say is true.
Which is true. It has, but at least from what I can tell and from my own research, it hasn't gone up disproportionately. And so, yes, we're all eating more protein, but we're not eating more protein. We're just eating more food in general.
Fundamentally, yes. Yeah. I would see that. And that's obviously not all foods, but a lot of foods do contain protein. I think as a quote, first world country, so to speak, that we're going to be leaning into more animal proteins because we have more access. And so more restaurants, more families, more individuals are going to start to include meat. I think when you hear like people talking about going like on a rice and beans diet, that's, for me, I know I can associate that to like, oh, I got to pinch some pennies. I'll just end up eating rice and beans.
Right.
So I think animal proteins tend to be the first thing to go. So it makes sense that as our country became, more enriched with economy and all the good stuff, that we'd end up eating more animal proteins.
Yeah, this is the thing that I feel like we need to understand, that we live in a free market.
Right.
So it is what demand dictates it is.
Yeah.
And if there's demand, then somebody's going to start a business to supply that demand.
That's true.
And people can hate the way that it works, they can love it, but at the end of the day, if everyone when everyone stopped using incandescent light bulbs, then companies started making LEDs. And if everybody prefers and demands electric cars, then car companies will stop making gas cars.
Absolutely.
If people just prefer meat, then unfortunately, for better or for worse, there's going to be entrepreneurs who create supply for the demand. And so we have to understand that and look at it objectively. And it's because it gets so emotional and so political. And it's
and it's interesting because there's so much truth to, like, there was a whole video disposition I watched about the disillusionment of like kind of the family unit by corporate standards in the 50s. And so it was like KFC advertising to women to kind of break the culture of like cooking at home. Not that I'm saying that women belong in the kitchen, but that was how the family unit
But
generally
they definitely
operated.
should not leave the house.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, they got other duties. But that, you know, for example, KFC was one of the first people to start specifically advertising towards women, like being like, now you can finally let that go. And it was basically a very obvious intentional campaign in hindsight to kind of move and sway the culture away from cooking.
Yeah.
And by empowering women, which I think is true, but the fundamental truth is that they've shown that even poor families or poor households that cook their own food tend to have better diets than richer households that eat more processed foods or eat out more often.
Totally.
And so it's by no means me saying that I don't care who cooks. I think it's about the family value set, or at least cooking your own food, and this kind of push towards, oh, we'll take care of it for you. You can you can chill out now, or you can let go of that responsibility. Might have not had like a evil agenda behind it besides making more money, but I think it led to some negative consequences. And I think it's one of the things that goes with it. So they quote that, or they talk about how excessive protein consumption, especially from cholesterol-rich animal-based foods, increases risk of cancer and heart disease.
There you go.
Right,
Yeah.
and we were talking about it earlier. It's like I think meat eaters have been just buckshotted into the people that eat fast food.
It's black or white. It's like
Yeah.
you're either a meat eating Whopper and fries, fast food, KFC,
Chicken nuggets.
or you're a vegan. And it's
Yeah,
like
and there's no middle ground that can be healthy. And no doubt, I think eating processed foods definitely can lead to higher risks of cancer and heart disease. And to what you were talking about before, supply and demand, as more Western culture and Americans wanting to eat more meat, certain individuals are going to create that opportunity for them, like McDonald's or like other people. And
Right.
so meat consumption as a whole might be going up, and there might be correlations with that, with higher cancer and higher heart disease. But that doesn't mean that high protein actually causes those things by any means.
100%. And
And
this
if
is like
anything, has like the opposite effect.
totally.
So here they get to use this line of like excessive protein consumption when associated with cholesterol-rich animal-based foods increases risk of cancer and heart disease, which is to say that like most people that are eating that meat are eating it from those places. And it's like, well, now we're just creating this piece of information that really is leaning people opposite from the truth. And we both have all these studies stacked up that we're going to pull out in a hot second here to basically conclude that eating high amounts of protein actually have a net positive benefit on all the good things. And we'll get into it, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. And it's like you didn't get cancer because you had a fillet of cod over a bed of vegetables.
yes, or eating baked chicken thighs with the skin on.
Yeah, no,
That you put some spices on yourself is
it's
not.
processed food. So if you're eating processed foods that contain a fatty piece of fried meat in the processed foods, whether that meat was there or not, you've increased your risk of heart disease and cancer and obesity. But protein in and of itself is probably the one thing that if we can just get people to consume more of, it tends to crowd out room in their food and their appetite for high levels of carbohydrate and fat, which just keeps their overall calorie consumption down by default. So if we can
Right.
just take people, and we did this in our first week of the program, where we don't even give people meal plans their first week. We don't say, here's your calorie targets. We don't say, eat this much protein. We don't give them meal choices. All we simply do is we give them a list of foods. And we say, here's your list of foods.
Right.
Here's your column for protein, your column for carbohydrate. And it's all whole food, single ingredient foods. So
Yep.
all your lean meats and proteins, not just meat, but all kinds of proteins. Your complex carbs, your quinoa, your brown rice, your all the good stuff. Your fruits and your veggies and your healthy fats. Knock yourself out. 1 week, just eat as much as you think that you need.
Yep.
Don't stuff yourself. Don't starve yourself. If it's 9 p.m. and you're hungry, just eat. And what we find time and time again is we look at their diet or we look at their eating habits before they join. We let them just eat normally for a few days and track that, just to get comfortable tracking food.
Just writing it down.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah.
And then we'll see like wild variations in their calories, huge swings, very low protein, typically very high carbohydrate and fat. And then we go step 2, now eat off this list of foods, and then immediately protein levels tend to go up. overall calories tend to go down, and we
Yep.
see a corresponding weight drop, typically on the low end 3 pounds. I've seen up to 11 pounds in the first week by just making the shift to whole foods. That includes
Right.
lean proteins, not organic necessarily, not grass-fed, not pastured, just a chicken breast, just
Well,
some
it's just a
lean,
macronutrient
just
we're
some,
talking
yeah,
about here, right? The qualities of your animal sourcing is a conversation that we could talk about later because
right,
of the Vox article in a sense, I think.
yeah,
But right now we're just talking about the macronutrient protein, which a
totally,
grass-fed steak and a regular steak isn't going to have too much of a
right.
difference in regard to that macronutrient.
So you can't tell me that this person just doubled their protein levels, dropped 10 pounds of inflammation, and now they're somehow at higher risk for cancer. It's like, no.
Yeah,
They've
yeah,
just averted disaster,
right.
actually.
And it's one of those things that, as we know from previous episodes, muscle mass is everything.
Right.
Decreases scale, pendulum swing to pendulum swing morbidity rates for everything from cancer, heart disease, bone injury, anything.
Yeah,
So,
it turns out when you have less body fat, more muscle mass, you actually kind of you build a moat, a little insurance policy around yourself to not have some of these diseases that plague so many people. And so this is where
and even if you do get a disease, like for the cancer rate, the number one determinant for surviving any type of cancer, including lung cancer, is how much muscle mass you have.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of time people go through chemo, they atrophy, they put their body through so much hard stuff that when they have that moat, that reserve, they can get through it better. And it's the same with elderly, like a hip fracture is a very common cause of death for elderly people because they might have to take surgery or endure breaking their leg if they fall. The more lean muscle mass an elderly person has, the exceptionally higher degree of survival rate from having a hip break or hip fracture or some type of serious bone injury. So it's all that same kind of idea.
So this is where it gets a little murky with their facts. It's like, okay, so on the one hand, they're saying we don't actually even need to eat 60 grams. We only need to eat less or whatever. On the other hand, what we know with controlled group clinical trials is that when you have more muscle, when you eat more protein, you increase your lean muscle. When you increase your lean muscle, your cancer survival rates are higher, your bone density is higher, you are just at less risk for pretty much any metabolic disease. And if you are on a fat loss diet, then when your protein levels are higher, you lose more percentage of weight from fat than muscle, which is huge.
Yes.
So this is where it's like, okay.
And that's literally just and again, we can talk about the thermogenic effect of protein,
Right.
that it takes 30% of the calories from protein to digest. And so that's one of the ways that if nothing changed about the calorie intake for an individual, except the ratio of the macronutrients went to higher protein, they're going to end whatever amount of time compared to somebody else with less body fat and at least the same, if not more muscle, but definitely less body fat because a portion of those calories are now going to that thermogenic effect, affecting their metabolism. And that's one of the reasons why high protein diets have been shown to be so effective at preventing obesity and keeping people that have come out of obesity lean, so to speak, or whatever relative that might be, as long as they keep that, because of one of the reasons, that thermogenic effect. Besides society.
The satiety of society.
This is satiety. Yes, feeling full, feeling satiated. Satiated. Yes, but they basically are all these hormonal mechanisms that have to do with protein, about being satiated as well. And so there's all these gut-produced hormones that basically, unlike ghrelin that's produced by the stomach to say that you're hungry, which we talked about in our last episode, eating protein basically has this wide array of mechanisms that basically, induce people to eat less food over time by being satiated, as well as having all the thermogenic effects we just talked about and stuff. So
yeah, and so that's exactly right, and that's where parsing through this, for all intents and purposes, it really is misinformation.
Yes.
It's basically a hit piece, right? To promote an agenda, and they're willing to. It's almost like in their minds, the ends justify the means, and so even if the end goal is to just try to get people to not eat factory farm meat, which is a noble goal, and I don't think you or I would disagree with that.
No.
But then to try to achieve that goal in some Machiavellian way, where we're willing to skew facts, we're willing to kind of lie or just frame the argument in a certain way that denies all the other facts about the matter only to support our point of view is just misleading people, and it's creating this like false narrative where now we have this whole population that's afraid to eat. And they don't know what to eat because this like they want to save they don't want to contribute to the planet pollution. On the other hand, they're reading stuff from people who are very smart and educated and saying you gotta eat more protein. They want to be healthy, and so no wonder eating disorders are at an all-time high because you can't eat anything.
You can't eat anything. Well, and the common things I've always heard about eating too much protein, which are legitimate concerns as I understood them, was bone density from mineral depletion from, I think, some of the byproducts of protein consumption.
Eating too much protein?
Yes, it leaches your mineral is one of the claims that's I thought to be legitimate, as well as from the uric acid being a byproduct of protein digestion, that it can be hard on your renal system, your kidney system. And so I dove into the research, and what I'll say about this study was that it was done on resistance trained in men. So they were doing resistance training, which I don't know why you would do that.
That's silly. That'll kill you. Bad stuff.
It's not like we had a whole episode on it. But basically they found that there was no measurable change in blood lipid levels, no change negatively in liver function, kidney function, or bone density. And that the only potential concern was that if you already had a pre-existing kidney disease condition, I can speak, with like that might be like genetic or something of that nature. But otherwise, no harmful effect. So even the concerns that I thought might be legitimate about high protein consumption, and one of the studies included over a gram per pound, concluded that that's not the case at all.
So I read one that said they had participants eating up to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight with no negative side effects.
So it's, again, the idea that processed foods being generally associated with the American diet and the increase in protein consumption in the American diet, which could be leading to disease, totally on board with.
Yep.
But I think it's pretty clear that the science says eating protein in high amounts as a macronutrient does not do what they're claiming it does.
Totally agree. And I think that this is where we have to really put an emphasis on lean protein.
Yeah.
Because when in my younger days, I might hear that and then just go, okay, I'm just gonna eat steaks then. And it's like, no, I mean, if all things being equal, we just only increase protein levels. So carbohydrates, fats, overall calorie ceiling, and then we just change the ratios to bring protein levels up.
Yes.
Then that's where the benefits come into play.
Agreed.
That's where all the benefits, the holy grail that we're talking about right now, it's lean protein consumption. And so, but if we're eating a bunch of like ribeye steaks that have 1,000 calories and fat in them, then that's where we're feeding into the narrative of someone like a publication like Vox, where if we can be one layer deeper, just a little bit more discerning, and consume leaner proteins or protein powders or things that aren't going to just bring our overall calorie ceiling through the roof, then you virtually avoid all of the negative consequences that those types of publications would claim that eating like the standard American diet will cause. So really the emphasis is like calorie ceilings based off
calories
of your goals
first,
and where calories are king, right? And I think that's number one. No matter what, calories are king. So in the hierarchy of health and weight loss, calories are king.
There's just no way around it.
Below that, calories and protein.
Yep.
But calories being first.
That's like 85-90% of it, really.
You could get in the most sick shape of your life if you just had a calorie target with a protein target.
And I think that is one of the issues, is that animal products do often carry a ton of fat. You think about bacon, you might be like, oh, well, that's probably as much fat as in grams wise as it is protein. And so calorically, it's almost twice as many calories coming from fat than protein in a slice of bacon. So there is that consideration, to your point, that it's not just like eat more animal products because animal products are generally associated with protein. It's about, you have to have some education. You have to kind of do a little bit of math, or just go on a calculator, TDEE.com or whatever it might be, just do a BMR, but get an understanding of what your basic caloric needs are so that you can then find what those ratios are, not just say, okay, well, I'm just going to eat more animal products because more protein is better.
Yeah, exactly. And this reminds me of the documentary that we reviewed, You Are What You Eat,
Yes.
where it's like, even just like the framing and the shots of that documentary, whenever they would cut to a meat eater, like all of a sudden, like it went more like grayscale, like
Kale, oh
sepia,
yeah.
and
Yeah, they
like they
just
would like
like
be throwing bacon on a pan. And then whenever they show vegans, it was like light, lit brightly, and like colorful, and everyone
like
looked,
plates of colorful food.
yeah, everyone looked so healthy and happy. And so just be conscious of the agenda behind this stuff.
Well, I think it kind of this leads into two routes I could want to talk about. Is one is that the guy Kenny Torella, I'll say, that the writer of the article is a staff writer for Vox's Future Perfect section, where they focus on animal welfare and the future of meat.
Oh, there you go.
Right. So there's obviously he's got some skin in the game.
No pun intended.
And that's from
Vegan
the
skin.
Meat Less Vox newsletter, which is about incorporating more plant-based foods into your diet. And so to that level, what I would want to say is that I think incorporating more plant-based foods is a great idea.
Yep.
And that it doesn't matter where the protein comes from. I don't care if it comes from the rice that you eat as an aggregate total, because rice has a little bit of protein in it.
Yep.
Or if it comes from lentils or cottage cheese or whey protein powder or a soy protein powder or a bean, corn. I think that the idea is that it just has to be a higher protein content. And I think that one of the things I'll give the article is that they did talk about good sources for plant-based protein, which I think is good education for people to have because they are less expensive. I do think they're more accessible to a wider range of individuals. I think that eating legumes and things of that nature are really good for you. And so I think there are ways to get that protein number up that doesn't just mean you have to eat chicken breast or a
100%.
lean piece of some ground turkey or something. But I just want to kind of, it goes back into that whole thing. So I think that's where the article does bring in some light, is that it is just trying to give education at the end to what I would say are affordable and high protein vegan or vegetarian options.
And I think that 100% valid. Couldn't agree more. It's just when we start to fearmonger our point, it's like if the argument is for animal welfare, then make that argument.
Right, which
Talk
exactly
about-
is what I would say. Yeah,
Make the argument for animal welfare. We all have feelings. We're all emotional beings. That would connect and resonate with more logical people, much more.
And even I think if you were to take that angle in for the sake of our environment and animal welfare,
Yeah.
you could get away with eating this much protein as a kind of like a lower end scale and be cool. So like, hey, Americans are eating twice the amount that's recommended. If you did like somewhere in between the two, you would probably be okay, and we can help the environment and help animals. Like almost give the information with the light of this isn't necessarily going to be the end of the world if you make this choice, and it might have this positive consequence, versus fearing the high end protein, fearing the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just almost like an honest sacrifice choice of like, if this is the way you chose to live your life, it would have these positive benefits. Here's what might happen to you, or here's how you could get by, and what's the minute, you know what I mean?
Totally. But yeah, exactly. I think that just when it turns into we are going to try to scare you and misinform you,
Yeah.
so that you start second guessing yourself, you start second guessing your choices, regardless of the truth behind it all, because I don't think we would find like listen, there's anecdotal science and there's clinical trials. Clinical trials, show me one that would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that eating a good solid 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is somehow in any way harmful.
No.
You can't. So that's where I'm like, listen, like the intentions are probably there and are probably good. It's just the way that they go about it to misinform and to fearmonger. Just it's almost like you're just pandering to your own base, or you're trying to scare people that are confused already. And I really do believe that this kind of misinformation is what is causing such a epidemic with eating disorders.
It's
because
crazy, yeah.
We live in a world where everything's shot right back at you in our own little echo chamber. Everything you search online, everything you look on social media, then all of a sudden you get tagged and you just see nothing but that in your face more and more and more. and people that just get spun off into these, they get siloed off into these like extreme ends where they don't even know
Belief
what's real
pockets.
anymore.
Yeah, well, it's what we're talking about, the echo chamber of social media and the tribe that you get attached to based on like your belief systems. And like in the article, they piggyback it with how you need more fiber, which of course a plant-based or vegetarian or vegan diet is going to have more fiber. And I would agree that you need more fiber. But here they come in with studies being like, here's the benefits of having more fiber. Here's how little fiber Americans eat, which I all think is true, but it's like the opposite of the fear mongering. It's like, let's scare you and then let's like fluff up and make this choice appear so much better based on science too.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, it is this emotional manipulation that is just wild. And it's so interesting because I think, you know, I think we were going to talk about potentially one of the things I was thinking about is like, how do you trust your information? Where do you draw the line of I don't want to believe this person, or how do you filter?
What's the criteria?
The noise. Yes.
The litmus that you're putting these the people that you follow, your influencers, whatever your source of knowledge.
The bodybuilder, the doctor, anyone.
What is the criteria? And it's like, is there an agenda? I think is a big one.
Probably. That's out of trying to just help you guys.
Yeah, like what are they trying? Are they trying like you know, our guy Liver King would be a good example. Like, is he trying to sell you something that is he trying to create a problem that just so happens his product solves?
Maybe.
Suspicious.
Maybe. Are they bad for you? Probably not. Is it
necessary?
Probably not either. Absolutely. And I think one of the facets I was thinking about is, and I know science has its potential pitfalls with agenda studies and things of that nature, but I think looking at science is probably the best way to start.
No, that's stupid.
And to
science
just at least...
what does science know?
And I think that there are ways to check on your science, but like there's this guy, Dr. Is, that I love, and he's, you know, got continuing education in nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And he basically just talks about all these crazy influencers and does like videos just debunking them. He calls it going time for school. People will reply back. He'll reply back again. You know, and even within that, people misread studies. And so there'll be people on social media just blasting off about like, this study said this. And he's like, well, you actually don't even know how to read the study. Goes back, finds the study that they're talking about and actually shows what the study really says. And what I really appreciate about him is that there's nuance. He doesn't make absolute statements. He might say, most people are okay with eating this much saturated fat, for as an example. But it's never absolute because, you know, there are going to always be exceptions. He always goes by the science. He's gone back on his own when there's been new science. He talks about how by using science, we can think critically and continually adapt our viewpoints and what we know to be true and not get caught up in dogma. And just he's so refreshing. And again, I know that just because it's a PubMed article doesn't mean that it's automatically a green light, but I think so far it's the best that we've got.
It's the best that's available to everybody, that we can all kind of share a collective database, and, you know, hopefully and you can tell when you read a study how good the study is. Like science isn't a binary either. Science is a continuum. There's some really good science. And there's some really bad science where it's like, oh, we did a group.
The egg cigarette study.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
Well, that would not even be considered, in my opinion, science. That's just observational. That's just like, oh, we asked a bunch of, you know, like demented senior citizens what they ate 30 years ago. It's like, that's not science.
Right. There's an article that talked about people went on carnivore diet, which is only meat, and it was, I think, a 6-week study, or I believe it was 6 week. And one of the things is they only took information from people that completed the diet, but not everybody completed the diet. So obviously the people that didn't complete the diet probably didn't respond well, but they didn't get any of the information from them, which was all just like, how did you feel? Do you have more energy? And so here's this like study being presented about how the carnivore diet had like a net wide positive effect for individuals on 6 weeks, but didn't include anybody that chose to not continue. And it was all anecdotal or just, you know, subjective opinion based. So there's a lot of stuff you have to filter through.
So it's like the studies we got to see. Control group is huge. Yeah. Human-based control group, randomized, clinical trials where you take a group of people where there's only one variable. Okay, so we have 20 guys. 10 of them, all 20 the exact same strength training routine, 3 days a week. All 20 ate the exact amount of calories during the study. The only variable was that one group ate 0.3 grams of protein per pound of body weight for the 8-week trial, and the other group ate 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight for the 8-week trial. That's a good study.
Right.
Where it's like, okay, everything being equal, 20 random guys, all do the same strength training routine, all the same amount of calories. The only variable was the amount of protein they ate. And at the end of that 8-week study, what were the results? That's what I want to see. And you show me that, I'm a believer. If it's like, oh, well, this person just ate vegan and this person ate meat and the vegans were better. Yay! It's like, well, what were their calories? What were the macros? What were the training protocols?
It's the odds of them just eating more single ingredient foods as a whole, which I fully condone, is probably one of the things that happened. It's also, I think, shared or common, like shared knowledge. Like if you start to get into the very popular YouTube influencers that are science-based, they claim to be science, but they're just the tried and true influencers that you'll end up, if you start looking into muscle gain, training routines, the popular personalities, but that are kind of the staples and mainstays, I would say that fundamentally what I notice is that they all say the same thing.
Yep.
The baseline of people that I respect fundamentally all say the same thing, whether it's just how to train or nutritional guidelines or even the science behind the nutrition. So I think that's another way that you could potentially filter it. Now, obviously, there's going to be echo chambers, so you can get into the fringe about anything, but I think if you can see that a person has a solid head on their shoulders, they reference science, they reference tried and true methods that have existed for a long time maybe, that's at least another way, because that is what I've noticed, is that the people that actually know what they're talking about say the same thing.
Tend to agree. Yeah.
Yes, because they tend to agree because it's the truth of it all.
Or is that just your echo chamber even?
I think that our episodes echo.
We are in the echo.
We are in the echo
chamber.
But I think what I would say is that we are just doing our best to actually share what we know to be effective and true, both from our own lived experience and from the science and from our own research. And we've been in the game a long time. And so I think the reason that the same kind of core message comes up about doing some resistance training, moving your body, and eating intentionally in some capacity with understanding to calories and macros as fundamental backbones of a healthy lifestyle is because
the truth does tend to all all the rivers of truth tend to pool in the same ocean, right?
You get sleep, you drink your water, you pay attention to what you eat, you don't overeat calories, and you exercise, and I guarantee you your life's going to improve substantially.
It all kind of points back to the same place. It's like every one of these episodes we've done 13. You go, okay, here's this article, or here's this documentary, or here's this influencer, and here's their thing, and then what's right with that, what's wrong with it, and then whenever we conclude, it always is like, listen, just make better food choices and lift weights, and you're probably gonna
go take a walk,
and like really kind of it is that simple. And then there's more nuance to it, but like, man, but that's hard. That's not clickbaity. That's not a hook, as they call it. It's just science and fact, and it's boring, and people want to believe that just maybe powdered bull testicle is what I'm looking for, is what I'm missing.
Hey, and if you've climbed,
it's the answer.
if it's time, if you've baked the cake and you've layered the cake and then you've iced the cake and then you've put frosting doodles on there and then you got sprinkles and then you want to put like one of those little edible flowers on top of your cake, and you want to take it that far and look into adaptogens like ashwagandha and maca and all these things, which I do think are beneficial, like ionic mineral supplements and things that I actually would say can have a positive impact on your health. All about it, but you can't put the little doily flower that's edible on your cake if you haven't baked the cake yet.
It's like people who are eating like a fish oil and taking a multivitamin every day, but then drinking a half a fifth of whiskey and staying up all night playing video games and ordering McDonald's. It's like, I mean, there's so much more we need to be doing here like whatever you think that fish oil's doing, dude, like
This is not enough.
that ain't gonna help.
Now, healthy individual supplementing fish oil.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a good thing. We could have a supplement conversation.
Ooh, that'd be a good one. We should break down different supplements on a future episode. Okay, cool. Well, I think that about wraps us up. That was episode 14. I said 13 earlier. That was episode 14 of Coach's Corner with Justin and Ethan. Thanks for listening, guys, and we will see you all next time.
Bye.